Dr. James Carter was a brilliant surgeon, admired not only for his skill but for his cool-headed approach under extreme pressure. At 38, he was at the pinnacle of his career, working at Mercy General Hospital, a renowned medical center in Chicago. Despite his success, Dr. Carter, who happened to be black, had navigated countless obstacles in a profession often colored by racial biases. Yet he never allowed these challenges to deter him. He believed actions spoke louder than arguments, and he let his work prove his worth. At home, James was a devoted husband to Serena and a proud father to his 6-year-old son, Noah. After long hospital shifts, he'd return home to read bedtime stories, cherishing every moment he could spend with Noah, who dreamed of becoming a doctor just like his dad. One Thursday evening, James received an urgent call. A 10-year-old girl had arrived at the hospital after a severe car accident. Her condition was critical, and immediate surgery was her only chance at survival. James didn't hesitate, he grabbed his car keys and raced out the door, fully aware that every second could mean the difference between life and death. He phoned ahead to Mercy General to have the operating room prepared. The image of this young girl, her life hanging in the balance, weighed heavily on his mind. As a father, he couldn't help but think, what if this were Noah? Speeding through dark, quiet streets, James felt his heart hammering in his chest. Timing was everything. Halfway through a suburban shortcut, red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. Sirens wailed, and James frowned but pulled over, glancing at the clock in mounting anxiety. He rolled down his window as 2 officers approached. One, Officer Reynolds, spoke curtly, license and registration. The other, Officer Daniels, hovered behind, one hand resting on his holstered gun. James calmly reached for his wallet. Officers, I'm Dr. James Carter, a surgeon. I'm on my way to the hospital for an emergency. A child's life is at stake. But Reynolds narrowed his eyes. You were speeding and blew through a stop sign. Step out of the vehicle. James tried to keep his composure, though his tone took on an urgent edge. Check my ID, call the hospital. I don't have time to argue. Yet Reynolds repeated, step out of the car, more firmly. Reluctantly, James obeyed, stepping onto the roadside. Officer Daniels moved in closer, ordering James to place his hands on the car. Bewildered, James pleaded, I'm not a criminal. I'm trying to save a child's life. Please, call the hospital. But Reynolds grabbed James's arm and cuffed him. A surge of frustration and fear coursed through James, not for himself, but for the child who needed him. You're making a mistake, he insisted. She doesn't have time. Meanwhile, at Mercy General, the situation was becoming dire. 10-year-old Grace Daniels had lost significant blood. Her mother, Anna, was pacing in the waiting room, pale with worry. Her father, Officer Daniels, was on duty and tragically unaware that his own daughter was the patient James Carter was rushing to save. Back on the suburban street, James sat in the back of the police cruiser, scanning his mind for any way to convince the officers of the urgency. Suddenly, Officer Daniels's radio crackled, Unit 7, we need you at Mercy General immediately, it's your daughter. She's in critical condition. Daniels froze. What did you say? The dispatcher repeated, it's Grace. There's been an accident, and they're waiting on Dr. Carter, but he hasn't arrived. Daniels felt his blood run cold. He turned to James. What did you say your name was? Dr. James Carter, James responded, a tremor of anger and desperation in his voice. Realization dawned in Daniels's eyes. He threw open the cruiser's back door, fumbling with the handcuffs. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice shaking. Go, just go. Without another word, Daniels climbed into James's car, insisting, I'll make sure you get there fast. They raced through the night, arriving at the hospital to find medical staff anxiously awaiting Dr. Carter. James sprinted inside, not looking back. Daniels remained in the waiting area, mind spinning with guilt. He had detained the very man who might save his daughter's life. Inside the operating room, James poured every ounce of skill and concentration into the surgery. Grace's injuries were extensive, but he worked methodically and relentlessly. Hours passed. Anna, Grace's mother, sat in a chair with her head in her hands, while Daniels stood by a window, unable to face her. Eventually, James emerged, scrub stained with blood, exhaustion etched into his features. Approaching them, he said, "She's stable. She's going to be okay." Anna broke down in relief, repeatedly thanking him. Daniels, though, struggled to meet James's eyes. "Dr. Carter," he began, voice trembling, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." James sighed, the weight of the night evident in his posture. "You didn't listen," he replied quietly, "but I didn't do this for you, I did it for her." Daniels nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. In the days that followed, the memory of that night haunted Officer Daniels. He visited James at Mercy General to apologize once more, this time bringing Anna and Grace, who wanted to thank the surgeon who had saved her life. Though James accepted the apology, he didn't sugarcoat the deeper issue. "This happens all the time," he said. "People judge by skin color instead of hearing what someone has to say. If you want to make it right, start there." Daniels took those words to heart. He became a vocal advocate for change within his department, determined to confront the biases that nearly cost his daughter her life. As for James, he returned to his work, more resolute than ever. His decision to save a life despite the obstacles had not only changed Grace's future but had sparked an important shift in perspective. The story of Dr. James Carter and Grace Daniels became a reminder to everyone who heard it: empathy can overcome prejudice, and second chances can transform guilt into meaningful action.